Okay, so we'll start with some preliminary chants like we did yesterday. Refuge in bodhicitta. Yeah, and then the mandala.
We're sharing the prayers on the screen. Hopefully you can see. Okay, we'll start with the taking refuge and generate bodhicitta, and we'll do 2 times in Tibetan and 1 time in English. Sangye, sorry, it's wrong tune.
I do a different tune too.
Sangye chodang soki chodnam la jangshu bardu dagni gyapsu chi dagi junin ki pe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupar chok sangye chodang soki chodnam la jangshu bardu dagni gyapsu chi dagi junin ki pe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupar Parshuk. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. The heart of the Perfection Wisdom Sutra. I prostrate to the 3 noble rare sublime ones. Thus did I hear at one time the Bhagawan was dwelling on massive Vulture's mountain in Rishikesh together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also, at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness. No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There's no I element, and so on, up to including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There's no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and past. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awakened to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to unequal, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering should be known as true, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tayata kate kate parakate parasamkate bodhisoha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from the concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that. It is like that one should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the word of God, Manasuras and Gandharvas were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by Bhagavan. Who did do this one too? Extensive dispelling of hindrances. I and all surrounding sentient beings take refuge in the Buddha, take refuge in the Dhamma, take refuge in the Sangha. We prostrate to the great Mother Prajna Parimatra, surrounded by her children, the assemblies of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions. In dependence on my prostrations to all of you, may these words of truth be actualized. In the past, the Deva King Indra dispelled the evil Maras by reflecting on the profound meaning of the wisdom gone beyond and reciting the profound words in daily recitation. In that same way, I also reflect on the profound meaning of the great Mother Prajna Paramitra and recite the profound words in daily recitation. Independent on that, may all diseases, spirit possessions, bad condition, and opposing forces which happen due to past karma and immediate condition be dispelled. May they become non-existent. May they be pacified.
Okay.
We'll do the short mandala offering. And then we'll do this in Tibetan. Ahon saha chibaki chu ching me to Tram re rap ling chi ni de gen pa di sang ge ching du me te hu wa yi dro kyun nam da ching la che par chu jet sulama ram pa kenam ki che ku he kala can te ju ten tri jeta sampe do je ten mala sab ke che ki shapa wap tu so idam guru radha mandala kam niryata yami.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. I hope you're doing good. Well, I think quickly or slowly depends on one's perception. So for you, it's quick, no? I don't know. I mean, no. I mean, that's pretty slow. Tibetan monks can chant really fast, but again, it's relative, So that's a question for the chant master, and the audio guy, he's the one who gets to purify the most karma because people can't hear. He gets a lot of stares, But if the chanting is too fast or slow, it's the chant master. I'm just joking around. Sometimes they chant that slower, just depends. Okay. Well, I noticed a lot of people here, welcome, who weren't here yesterday. um, if you were kind of doing something that's like moving from topic to topic, so if you want to kind of know how today is connecting to yesterday, then I think they have the recording, so you can check out the recording from yesterday. It's good to see you. um, so basically, I'll give a short review just for all of us because that's always helpful, no matter if we are here or not. So what we're doing is I'm going to review in a way that maybe is fresh, also for those of you who were here yesterday to kind of say it in a different way. What we're doing is trying to gain some grasp of where the mind binds us, essentially. And there's different perspectives in Buddhism. We have different vehicles. All of the approaches kind of work together. They don't work against each other, but they have different approaches. We're taking approach more from teachings that go directly to mind, teachings that go directly to, how do you say it? From a Buddhist perspective, it's like all appearances, all experiences depend on mind. So eventually, if you go right to mind, you can kind of reconcile or resolve all other problems. And this is very unique to Buddhism because it's a little bit against, I would say it's the antithesis of modern materialist view. Modern materialist view is like materialism comes first and then everything comes from that, right? Buddhism is the opposite. And actually, the more we go into, and again, you don't have to believe that. I'm just, these are questions, right? Open questions. So the deeper we go into the Buddhist path, the more closer it gets to mind, the more closer it gets to first understanding our perception and relative nature of mind. That's what we talked about yesterday. And then today it's going to talk about a little bit more ultimate nature of mind, or its absolute nature. So it gets more and more subtle, more and more subtle. So why is that? That's because from a Buddhist perspective, all phenomena comes from mind, right? More or less. All phenomena is produced by mind. And this is a little bit, I think, a very interesting premise because it also means our body is produced from mind, which is a wild idea, right? Because we all know, and think, okay, well, my body is produced from my, father and mother, right? Or whatever situation produced your birth. And we think that was it. That was the beginning. From a Buddhist perspective, that was a condition. That wasn't the cause. See how it gets interesting? So, of course, Buddhists are not anti-material. Like, we have to accept what is part of our, physical reality. We have to work with that. That's part of conventional or relative reality. So we have a lot of teachings on how to work with that skillfully. But from a Buddhist perspective, that's not the cause. The cause comes from the mind. The cause comes from our habits of mind, our predispositions, and all of that. So this goes into that category from yesterday. In yesterday morning, we spent a long time, right, talking about how to keep an open mind, but also how to use skepticism and reflection. So this would go into that reflection category. Of course, we need to study it more. Sometimes if we don't have enough information or enough learning, and we go too quickly into the reflection, we don't have enough to work with. So there's not enough to sort of prove either way. You know what I mean? And I think these kinds of questions on matter and mind and how those are interrelated, and what produces what, these are deeper ones that often we spend many years reflecting on. So it's not an immediate answer we need necessarily. But it's a very pivotal one because I think if we're not able to at least, how do you say it, entertain the idea that how do you say it, material reality is not the only part of reality. If we're not able to entertain that idea, we're going to have a very difficult time in meditation, right? Because it'll be limited to that, you see? But again, I think here there's a science, right? This is what's really important. Buddhism has a science. It's not just random spiritual religious dogma. There's a whole science to this. So when we study the science, that's when we can actually use reasoning and logic and use our thinking mind to try to have some kind of inference. But then, of course, through meditation, we go beyond inference into direct experience. But I think inference, like we were talking about yesterday, it's a really important step. If we're not able to have inference, it's very difficult to how do you say it? Satisfy our conceptual mind. Our conceptual mind is like both a very useful thing and a friend sometimes, and also like a demon, no? It's kind of like this really annoying guy who just wants to mess with my life, right? So ultimately, we could say like concept isn't a problem in and of itself, but fixation on concept is. That's what these texts I'm using are talking about. So this is something to distinguish in meditation. It's not something to distinguish necessarily here. We have to practice. But anyways, so inference is important. But once we have some inference through some learning and reflection on the Dharma, we can maybe entertain. Entertain doesn't mean we've been convinced. Entertain just means we have an open mind that, matter isn't the end all be all, physical matter, right? Actually, I think in a way we don't even need Buddhism for this so much because modern physics, a lot of us somehow science has become, dogma. It's become dharma. So it's sort of like most of us were like, oh, physics said this, so it must be true, which is very interesting, no? We sometimes don't realize we already have a view. We already have a belief. A lot of us move from pre-modern views and beliefs like tribalism, not all parts of the world, obviously. It's part of the problems we're in right now. Not that tribalism is bad, but when tribalism conflicts with the modern world, that's when we get some difficult problems and wars in the world. But anyways, another topic. So, uh, so yeah, when we adopt modern ideas, science kind of comes along as an implicit view. So, honestly, like it's not like science is bad. I mean, they're doing a good job in some things. It's just that also has to be open for discussion in our mind, open for reflection. Because if we just believe that and we don't recognize there's an implicit belief, we're going to have a really hard time with the Dharma, the Buddha Dharma. Not that we have to believe this. That's also not what I'm saying, right? You see? But it's interesting because often you hear people say, "Oh, this study said this." It's like, what the hell does that even mean? It means they have a hypothesis and they have some kind of inference, right? But it doesn't mean they figured out reality. I mean, no science worth their salt would say that, right? I mean, maybe some of you are scientists, so you could tell me. I don't think a good scientist in the pedagogy of science, there's like this idea you have it's hypothesis and exploration and rigorous testing. So I like that about modern science. Buddhism also has that, but it has a way to test the subjective as well. That's what's very interesting. So from Buddhist science level, we don't just test the objective, we test the subject. And then when the subject can prove something, I guess, to the subject, right? We can have more confidence in the path. So a lot of this, like when we meditate, actually it's like the subjective experience, the subjective science proving itself to us. You know what I mean by subject? It's just us. Like, so, this is one discrepancy between Buddhist science and modern science is that I think modern science kind of assumes there's an objective reality. And so therefore there's something the subject sometimes isn't, of course, a good scientist takes that into account. There's a subject looking, but Buddhism gets really interested in that. More like who's the looker, who's the one looking through the microscope or looking at the phenomena. And we take that into account. I think that's where it gets really interesting, right? We were talking about, in a different way, we were talking about this yesterday. But I ended up on a tangent, as I did yesterday a lot of the time. This isn't always how I teach. Somehow in this room, I just get into this kind of way. So I hope it's useful and I'm not just sort of wasting your time. But anyways, so because mind, that's what I was talking about. So because um, things arise from mind, eventually, as the Dharma gets more and more direct, it's causing us to look at mind, right? So that's one of the reasonings here. So we could see this, like we kind of had a lot of conversations on break times yesterday, where some people are wondering, oh, what's why do chanting? Why have like I mean, they weren't asking this, but now I'm asking this. Why have statues and pictures and like religious paraphernalia, Actually, all of this are the outer supports to trigger, remind, mm, point to mind and the essence of mind. So this is kind of, again, in these Mahamudra teachings we're talking about a little bit more. We're more using that perspective a little bit this weekend. It becomes explicit. But all of this other outer things are there to help us get there, right? We talked a little bit about the word guru yesterday too, only because it comes up in the text. I'm not talking about any guru business here because we're not, we're in a different thing. But the word came up, so we talked about it, how it can get confusing because people often think of just a person. We're actually in Buddhist Tantra, it's a principle, which includes a person. It includes our physical teachers, who we received transmission from, but it also includes the lineage figures. It also includes emptiness itself, and it also includes mind and its nature, which we would call the absolute guru, which means that's the so that absolute one is the deepest one. It's what all of the other gurus are pointing to. So see what I mean? Like sometimes if we get lost in the dynamics of something, it's easy to lose what do you call the forest for the trees? Is that how we say it? It's easy to lose that. But at the same time, having a support of a statue, things like prostrations, incense, chanting, long rituals that seem strange if it's not your culture or you don't know how to do it. These are all part of approaching mind. See, so it's like sometimes we get too much into an extreme where we want to deny how do you say it, how the interdependence of things, how we can use relative reality in a skillful way. And then sometimes we go to the extreme of how do you say it, only getting stuck in the relative reality, right? Like getting stuck in the ritual. This would be like, what the Buddha said to avoid, like avoid empty ritual, essentially, was one of his first teachings. A lot of people now use this to distort the Dharma now, especially few Western teachers I know. I won't say their names. Because they use that as a quote to assert their secularism of Buddhism, or to, how do you say it, support their secularization of it. But they can, I mean, the truth is people can do whatever they want. It's a free country. But it's not Buddhism necessarily. Because in Buddhism, we're really interested in using relative truth combined with absolute truth to help support us waking up or knowing mind, right? And this is really important. So, if we know this key point, we can really benefit from skillful means of certain activities. Like Vajrayana Buddhism has a lot of skillful means for accumulating merit, developing bodhicitta, basically enhancing this capacity to free ourselves for the benefit of others. Has a lot of skillful means. And then, of course, once one is realized, a lot of skillful means to benefit others through what we call the four activities. So there's a lot of things in Buddhist Tantra. But if you don't know what it is, like we were talking about yesterday, on the outside, it just looks a little strange or unrelatable, or, oh, for some people, that's too religious. But actually, it's just a lack of understanding what it is and how it functions in the relative world. So usually we put this in the category of interdependence, and interdependence is really important. We have to pay attention to interdependence. And I use the example often of like those of us who get stuck more on the materialist side. No, I'm not judging anyone, right? Just using this as a way for us to understand our experience. This is for you to investigate, not for me to judge you, right? But those of us who are stuck more on the materialism side, we pay a lot of attention to the interdependence of whether our car has gas or is charged enough if it's an electric car, right? It's true. a lot of attention to that interdependence. And that's a interdependence, meaning if the properties and chemicals and substances in the gas don't enter the tank, and if the tank isn't functioning well and the engine isn't functioning well, we're not going to be able to go to the store. We're going to have to call an Uber or walk or whatever, right? So that's interdependence, causes and conditions coming together. So we pay a lot of attention to that, right? But in this kind of world, we have to start paying attention to also the interdependence for awakening. That's what we're talking about here. So we have to also poise the mind. I'm not saying don't put gas in your car. Do that. But if we're interested in waking up, basically, if we're interested in unbinding the mind, then we need to pay attention to interdependence. All of this stuff, it's all interdependence, but very skillful means stemming from the Buddha Shakyamuni. So again, that's a religious perspective, but when we analyze it, we can see, and when it takes some time and some study and practice, we can see there's some truth there. And then we don't have to follow these extremes. We often call these extremes losing the conduct in the view and losing the view in the conduct. That's another way to describe the extremes I'm talking about. So losing the conduct in the view means that we kind of fall into some kind of a nihilism. And for me, I notice in the modern world, nihilism and materialism go together a lot of the time. So we fall into some kind of nihilism like, oh, it's all about just meditating on the breath. I don't need anything else. This is a little bit of a nihilism. It's not like that's bad. And as a beginner, it's fine because we need something simple. But eventually we have to mature. So it's a little bit of a nihilism because what it's doing is denying all of the interdependences that have proliferated in different Buddhist cultures for 2,600 years. To me, I don't know. I understand that mentality, but I also struggle with it a little bit because it's like sometimes we can be quite stubborn as human beings because it's like, okay, there's something that exists for 2,600 years. We have examples of beings who are like, how do you say it? Quite inspiring. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, like lots of beings like that. And we can see, well, it's not like, how do you say it? That's one example. We can see in a human being someone who's transformed, who's kind of not normal. Like they don't function based off the status quo. And again, of course, that depends on our perception. But if we pay attention to like His Holiness and his life, we can see Holiness Dalai Lama. We can see it's not like a normal person. There's something else going on there. And then we can infer, well, where did that come from? That came from him engaging with a system that helped him to uncover his Buddha nature, right? So what we were talking about yesterday, our Buddha nature. So I think so sometimes we have to start there because I think this is quite sad if in one way. I feel like we're really going to struggle with Buddhism once we lose examples of what Buddhism can produce. You see what I'm saying? So that's really important. Actually, we can take that to heart in our practice. It's not like we have to reserve that for just monks and nuns and His Holiness the Dalai Lama. We have to take our practice seriously because we will be examples to others, of what a free being looks like. But we don't have to be that free being. We are once we sort of, have churned the Dharma somewhat. That's important. So I think, anyways, so interdependence. That's what I was talking about, view in the conduct and conduct in the view. So losing the conduct in the view is like we get lost in a little bit of nihilism and we don't pay attention to interdependence. Like we don't pay attention to the interdependence of certain aspects of the Dharma as much as we pay attention to putting gas in our car. You see what I'm saying? So that needs to be corrected over time. And often we just need to study that and understand that non-dogmatically. That's why I'm a big fan of like talking these things out, explaining them, because otherwise like we were talking about yesterday, it's like they just become something we wrote, but we don't really understand the meaning behind it, right? Once we understand the meaning, it really becomes quite deep. So that's one way of losing the conduct and the view. Now, losing the view and the conduct, this is the one where I want to be careful here. Losing the view and the conduct is when we become so focused on the thing, like, okay, so you need to exactly hold the bell, the beater, exactly here. And in this Dharma center, we ring it once, we wait 5 seconds. Then we ring it again, and then you bow. But you don't know the reason for that. There's no context. It's just something you follow dogmatically with, and most importantly, without the view that you're doing this to know your mind. Do you see what I'm saying? If we do all of that, if some lady or guy or whoever makes up this rule, but they made up this rule and then taught how to use that as a way to know the essence of mind, to know the nature of mind, to know how to be free or how to unbind the mind, this becomes a genuine interdependence or ritual or practice to wake us up. You understand? But if we don't know that and we just do it, right, then we have lost the view and the conduct. So, I know some of you are really new to meditation and the Dharma. So this is something you'll grow into. I'm just sharing this for people who have been around for a while and as an introduction for you. Because Buddhism does a little bit, there can be some sort of, the Buddha did give, we usually call it expedient. No, sorry. Provisional teachings. And it sounds a little bad, but I don't mean it this way. I'm more quoting a Lama who likes to say it this way. It's sort of like the kindergarten area of Buddhism, but it's really important. I mean, if we didn't have kindergarten or some form of education when we're small, we're not going to grow up kind of in a nice direction. So provisional, preschool, kindergarten, all of that is really important. We also need to mature, right? And study the Dharma and continue to grow. And that's where it gets really interesting because we were talking, it goes into this area of where is the Dharma pointing? In another way, we could say all of the from kindergarten, preschool through kindergarten, through elementary school, through middle school of Dharma, through high school, college, doctorate, all of that, it all starts to point towards wisdom, right? Or prajna. So that's where everything points. And if we recognize that key point, we'll be able to use the kindergarten in a really skillful way. So, how do you say it? What's provisional? Actually, vows are provisional, like precepts are provisional, but they're also really necessary because it's a way, a skillful means to use our actions of body, speech, and mind to move more towards understanding mind and how to unbind ourselves from pain. Getting back to my original point. So this leads me to my next thing I was going to say kind of at the end of today, but I might forget, so I'm going to say it now. Initially, a lot of the Dharma spends time kind of pointing more at where we're bound, right? Giving us clues, encouraging us to look there. And this is, I think, one of the things that is tough for people in the modern world because we often want to move towards what's comfortable. But actually, comfortable is not necessarily liberating, right? I mean, I know this quite well, right? I grew up near here in San Mateo, so I grew up like middle class, like a very comfortable life, and man, it really is. In one way, you could say it's good. In another way, I've had certain kinds of struggles because of that. You know, I'll just name one that's like maybe more obvious. Um, like I'm kind of soft. Like I don't have thick skin and you know I'm not like good at physical labor. So I was helping to build a stupa in the first Dharma center I started at in Boston, Kurukula Center. um, when I was living there, they started building or no, I was visiting for a day and then helping. And there was just like they have a huge Tibetan community around that center, and so the Tibetan community interacts a lot there, Kurukula Center. And they had like a huge delivery of concrete, bags that needed to be carried from one area to another. And I just remember like I picked one up and and they're heavy, like really heavy. I picked one up and I was like, oh man. And everybody thinks because I'm a big man, like I'm physically robust. No, I'm pretty soft, because I grew up here and, you know, anyways. I mean, you could grow up also physically strong here too. So I don't want to say that. Just my laziness. So, anyways, I pick up a big bag of concrete and I'm walking and I'm like, man, I don't think I can do this for like more than maybe 30 minutes or 45 minutes. I'm not kidding. I go back to the pile where the bags are. I see a tiny, like tiny, maybe this tall Tibetan grandma, probably like at least 70 or something like that. Just like like she's 25, you know? Pick up a huge bag and just cart it over. And I thought, what the hell is wrong with me? This is like 70-year-old Tibetan Amala, we'd call it, like a grandma, you know? So that was one of my first teachings on how culture and where you live affects the physical body, right? So, I mean, Tibetans are known for being they're stocky and a little bit robust. And especially if they grew up in old Tibet or they grew up having to, um, in exile, which was a lot of work and a lot of suffering physically. So very uncomfortable. But there's a kind of robustness, right, that grows from that. And I think we all know this in our lives in different ways. Anyways, so initially, the Buddha Dharma asks us to look at those uncomfortable areas of our life. More or less, what I'm saying here, look at where we're bound. So I don't know if you all noticed yesterday, but when we were meditating, probably you noticed like you saw a lot of moments, a lot of experiences where you're bound, probably more than where you're not bound, right? Correct? And for a lot of us, we think, oh, like something's going wrong. I'm not, I mean, for me too, I'm not saying just for you. We think, oh, something's going wrong. The meditation is going wrong. I need to get away from this. I need to go towards the light or whatever, whatever is implicit in what we're thinking. But actually, the Buddha would say, no, this is the purpose of meditation, to see your mind. And what do we see first? All of the fun, oohs, ahs, all of the garbage often. All of the things we don't want to see, we see. But that is part of developing insight in meditation. It's part of getting free. So I think that hurdle is challenging. It takes some strength and I think intelligence to recognize that's an important thing. Like we need to go through that doorway or window. And for me, that's a long doorway. I've been at this 24 years, which isn't that long, but it's half my life, I guess. Yeah, a little more. And that window continues to open. That window of continues to how do you say it? Bear more fruit. And it's really implicit in the Buddha's first teaching. That's what he said. So when, well, actually his first teaching, his first teaching was that the mind, the nature of mind is inexpressible. So I'm not going to talk. That was his first teaching. His first teaching was to not talk because talking would demean the view. Talking would bring something that's pristine and beyond constructs, would bring it into something, yeah, like that would just create confusion. So that was actually his first teaching. But directly after that, once he was, as the story goes, once he was like encouraged by Brahma and Indra to teach, he reconnected with these 5 ascetics and they became his first 5 disciples. And that's where he taught the Four Noble Truths, right? In Sarnath, as we know it, as we know the story. And his first teaching was to know dukkha, to know dissatisfaction, no suffering, no confusion. Dukkha is a huge word. It's a big word, I don't think in English we can't really translate it with one word. It needs to be opened up. And to me, it's so powerful because this is flavoring the whole thing from the beginning to the middle to the end of the path, right? Because part of our fundamental dualistic confusion is we think suffering is suffering. This is part of the problem, right? So right away, the Buddha's kind of right in the preschool. He's helping. He's has his hand on our back, or taking our hand and leading us into what the nature of our mind actually is, leading us back to our Buddha nature, like as we talked about yesterday, our awakened nature, which is, as I said, is innate to all of our minds and all sentient beings. So it's quite beautiful, but it does take some maturity to recognize that. So over the course of our path, we're going to resist that, you know? We're going to look for the light and refuse the dark. But actually, awakening is beyond the light and the dark, but it also includes both, but it's also beyond, right? So this is kind of one of those tricks of the path. And so, as I was saying, the more we practice, the more we understand, we can see everything pointing to this wisdom nature, which goes beyond both suffering and happiness. So sometimes just because of translation issues, it gets complicated. So some people might use the word happiness. Probably I've used it from time to time, when we're describing awakening or something like that, but it's not really happiness. Happiness is a very fleeting thing. So what we say when we get into the deeper teachings, like what we're studying here, the awakening or enlightenment is beyond suffering and happiness. It's something that transcends both. So that third thing, that thing that we can't really conceptualize right now, how do you say it? We have to grow some kind of interest or passion in that. And the first way we do that is by looking at all of the things that suck. Not in other people, not in the world, in our mind. We're really good at doing that with other people, right? I'm an expert of that. We're really good at doing that in the world, right? That's all distraction, all wasting our time, in my opinion. And sorry if I'm very direct. I just feel we don't have a lot of time. Why am I going to waste your time here? You're all very intelligent, heartfelt people. Why beat around the bush, as we say? Just go direct, as long as it's kind. So we need to turn that mirror back, but also learn how to do that with kindness. I think that's the hard part. Because also often, like myself, I can be a very judgy person. That also includes a lot of self-judgment. So we also have that as part of our work, because we need to be able to take stock and look at mine and look at our experience, and most importantly, understand what's binding us to samsara or binding us to pain or dukkha. We need to do that in a way that has some kind of objectivity, right? Where we can have some distance, but also we feel it. So we have the inspiration to get out. Actually, one thing that kind of took some years to recognize is it's really, it took some years for me to recognize, and I'm still trying to deepen this. I have still a very superficial understanding of this. It's really impossible to develop bodhicitta without what I'm talking about here. It's kind of just a nice idea. Because if we don't have a real connection to our own pain and where that's coming from, and we don't feel it on the earth, at its essence, and we also don't develop the wish to be free from that, how the hell can we ever develop a wish for someone else to be free from that? Maybe best case scenario, we're developing some kind of nice worldly altruism, which is okay. It's like, I'm not going to bash that. That's a nice thing to do, to be a kind person, want people to have less physical illness. Also, bodhisattvas want that. They want people to experience less suffering. But mostly, bodhisattvas and Buddhas, they want people to wake up, right? Because if people aren't being taught how to wake up, and that we're losing that, or that's not being clear, it's just like a dream that's just repeating and circling in the same mess. Sometimes that mess looks really nice, like I was in Los Gatos Apple Store last night, like a Los Gatos Apple Store. Sometimes it looks like the dream looks like that. And then we think, a pretty good dream, I'll take this dream, but what's the nature of dreams? Just in general, like at night. They don't last, right? I mean, we wake up, but what the Buddha was saying is part of the bondage or predicament is we're not waking up. So all of this is to wake up, whether the dream is Los Gatos Apple Store or Skid Row in San Francisco. Sorry, what is it? Sure, take whatever your pick of, like, from the God realms to the hell realms. you know? So all of it exists, and all of those potentials are not only there for us in the future, but we've been experiencing them from a Buddhist perspective. So when we get into these kind of teachings, they're kind of like really getting into the essence of like they're really for people who see they're dreaming and want to wake up from that dream, and also see others are dreaming, and of course we have a collective dream together, and want to become like, it's not so much a saint. I think this is what gets mixed. A lot of Abrahamic ideas get mixed into Buddhism nowadays. It's not really about becoming a saint. It's like when there's a light on, the room becomes illuminated. People walk in there, and even if they don't have eyes, they sense there's something different. That's what bodhisattvas and Buddhas do, you know? Of course, they teach, they can manifest as different things and all of that. But I think it's more this presence. That's what, to me, is very inspiring, because the idea that we're trying to become something else, this is also the antithesis of what the teachings are saying. Because what they're actually recommending is unbecome, right? Connect back to Buddha nature, release, let go. So, I don't know. That wasn't a review from yesterday, but something like that. Yeah. Something like that. Um, so practice wise, I'm just going to kind of continue. We're going to do some meditation right now. I'm just going to continue, but I apologize to those who weren't here yesterday. I'm not going to give much instruction. We're just going to do it. I'll give a little bit of guidance in the beginning, but we did a lot yesterday, and then we're gonna actually continue with more methods. So the method isn't singular; it's sort of like develops, right, from through different elements of shamatha, and then we'll do a little bit of vipassana, also probably after lunch. So so for practitioners, like if you're a, how do you say it? You have like a T-shirt with a Buddha on it. I'm just joking. I had teachers like that. No, I never did because some lamas advise against it. But I had t-shirts with like "Om Mani Padme Hum," things like that. Um. So, anyways, if you're kind of like, if you think of yourself as a Buddhist, which is fine, you can generate or take refuge and generate bodhicitta again, just silently. For those of you who are kind of here more as just like curious, like I call I have two names. Some people are Buddhist serious, right? That's who I was just naming before. And then there's also Buddhist curious, just people who are curious. So for the Buddhist curious who are in the room or listening to this, um, remember this. Remember what I said about Buddha nature. That there's this possibility, this other option, that we are not fundamentally screwed up. That actually, at our essence, we're free. It's just that that is covered over, and hence why we're here and talking and spending all this effort. So just reflect on that. But for a Buddhist, you can also deepen that Buddha nature reflection and going into a refuge, outer refuge in the three jewels, inner refuge, one's own Buddha nature, etc. Just like I was saying, once we recognize and look at our own confusion a little bit, we can also recognize others are also dreaming and confused about that. And so we can generate some like closeness to them. Like they're not just how do you say it? Like they're not just on their own, like, okay, good luck, pal. That's not what we're developing as a Mahayana practitioner. It's more like a closeness, a warmth towards them, and then a compassion, which is willing to also deal with their suffering. Here we're dealing with it mostly in just reflection right now. And then we generate the altruistic wish that any meditation we do, any listening, reflecting, meditating on the Dharma today throughout our life can be for the benefit of others, that we can wake up and become that light that just shines. And again, for the Buddha serious, we're going to visualize the Buddha like we did yesterday. And try your best to imagine the Buddha as actually present and alive. meaning like he's made of light. He's in the form of a monk, but um, it's like an unbelievable sight. And also, you can use feeling here. So when we visualize, we don't just use like the visual image. For me, it's actually more useful to feel like I'm in the room with the Buddha. And the Buddha's not a normal presence, you know? So it's like imagining this light of enlightenment in the room with us, essentially, but in the form of the Buddha. And so when we recite the Buddhist mantra, we supplicate the Buddha, and we supplicate the Buddha knowing that we also have Buddha nature. And then when we eventually, in a few moments, dissolve the Buddha into us, that's that recognition we're going to rest with, which we did yesterday. And this is all coming from this text on the Genden oral tradition of Mahamudra. That's what I'm borrowing from right now. So that's the source. Taya tao muni muni mahamune soha. Taya tao muni muni mahamune soha. Taya tao muni muni mahamune soha. From our hearts just opening. A lot of these kinds of practices are just to open the heart, to remember Buddha as not just historical, but Buddha as our essence, the essence or the nature of all beings. And we supplicate from our heart for inspiration, for blessings, for a spark, an interdependence to trigger or wake up our own Buddha nature. And with that, we imagine the Buddha really happy. Why is he happy? Not because you're becoming Buddhist, not because you're praising him or anything like that. He's happy because we're remembering our Buddha nature. And just by interacting with that, it brings us closer to uncovering it. We imagine he becomes extremely happy with that. And then slowly he comes to the crown of our head and dissolves into light. And as he dissolves into light, he also begins to dissolve into us, becoming inseparable with our body, speech, and mind. And we just allow our minds to rest there for a moment. So once the dissolution happens completely, let go. Don't focus the mind, but don't become distracted. And those of you who want to work a little bit more with open-eyed meditation, like we talked yesterday, either half open or fully open, we just allow all the senses to be open. We're not blocking our sense of hearing, smell, taste, touch, or sight. Even if you just let the eyes be open a little bit, it's useful. We're not staring at anything in particular. We're just open. And then we click into this aspect of mind that's aware, knowing, present, and we just rest there. We rest in the knowing aspect or the clear aspect of mind without an object. So just as I said, we're not focusing on anything in particular. This is a particular kind of shamatha for those of you who are just showing up today. Particular kind of shamatha we practice in the Mahamudra traditions. So meditative awareness without an object. And of course, if you really need an object, please use your breath or whatever you normally do. But try this with me for at least a few minutes. Just let go, but be aware. Awareness is this quality of mind that can be watchful, observe, that knows. So preserve that gently and just rest into that. There's nothing to focus on. But also, if we just end up distracted, we've lost the meditation. So there is something to maintain gently, which is this clear, undistracted nowness and an awareness of that. You can alternate between that and an object like the breath or the body if you'd like. But try it. Let go and trust yourself. The main key here is relax. That's another way to think of this. Relax with awareness. Let go of conclusion and repeatedly come back to a fresh moment. When you need to re-recognize awareness, no problem. This particular practice is not so much in the beginning about sustaining something with a lot of concentration. It's more about relaxed awareness. And when we lose that, we just recognize awareness again. This quality of the mind that's watchful, that knows, but we don't get involved in what it's knowing. We just become the host, as I was saying yesterday. Awareness is like a host. Anything can come in or out of our experience. Don't block anything. And there's just aware, the mind as it is, and nowness, like a fresh nowness. We'll practice silently for another 10 or 15 minutes. Hey. So for those of you just joining us today, we if you're having trouble like settling in meditation, I introduced some embodiment techniques that I find personally very helpful, and also a lot of people I work with find helpful. So if you want to touch base with that, you can listen to the recording yesterday. Um, I talked a little bit about it yesterday, but basically, I think this is becoming like more widely included in meditation of how much many of us are disembodied because we tend to spend most of our time in the thinking mind in kind of the modern world. So we kind of have to re-include direct practices of embodiment and things like that. And this is a whole world. Like we could just do a weekend retreat on that easily. So it's a lot of the area I spend time in because it's not often talked about in the traditional text because people from, let's say, like pre-modern cultures didn't struggle with that so much. You know, I mean, I don't want to generalize too much, but I think there was less of a struggle. So if you want to check that out, I recommend listening to the recording yesterday. Did we lose Zoom? Oh, just the picture of it. Um, what was I going to say? Yeah, no, that's all I was going to say about it. That was another topic I'm moving on to. Okay, yeah, real quick, and then we'll take a break. Um, well, real quick, this is my famous last words. 20 minutes later. As you can all tell, I'm very talkative. Um, so yeah, I just wanted to qualify something because I think the the practice of learning to I sometimes call it like getting comfortable with our uncomfort. That's sometimes what I talk, how I describe it. But in traditional Buddha Dharma, it would just be the practice of understanding the nature of life, right? Sometimes they call it samsara traditionally. Sometimes they call it, I don't know, uh, like our experience, life, all of that, or dukkha, as I said. And of course, like there's a lot of material to study and to learn about that, and then to apply to reflection. And then when we're in the meditation phase on that, one thing I didn't say that I think is quite important, because I think a lot of people get this confused, is that it's not about dwelling on the dukkha. It's not really about dwelling on the pain or discomfort. I think a lot of us a lot of us know our dukkha in a certain way. We know how to dwell on it, right? Or we know how to resist it. We know how to fight with it. Um, Basically, we know a lot of skillful means to avoid it. Most of us, right? Myself included. I'm not, so the area of like learning to work with our dukkha and to open up to an experience of that, both as an understanding and as a direct experience in meditation, it's not really about avoiding it. It's also not about dwelling in it. So, what is it about? I think, in my experience, it's more about gaining some tools through meditation. So, there are some preliminaries we need. We're working with them just now. Some tools of awareness where, again, we can start to not dwell on the dukkha, but also not distance or dissociate ourselves from it. That's why I going back to embodiment things, that's why I do spend a lot of time on embodiment in my personal practice and also with others. Because one of the main or key areas where we tend to dissociate is our feeling world in the modern world. And again, I'm generalizing. It really is a spectrum for all of us, right? Depending on how we grew up and where. But modern education doesn't teach us how to work with the feeling world. It teaches us how to develop more intellectual reasoning and thinking and analysis, which is fine. It's just that if that gets imbalanced and we're not able to include the feeling world as part of our experience, and to know how to not dwell in the feeling, but also that we don't have to disassociate from it. And that area is really key to developing genuine compassion. Otherwise, compassion ends up just as being an intellectual thing in Buddhism. So this is what I find the area of, you know, of course, understanding the dynamics of samsara is important, but on a very like basic level, it's more about learning how to meet our experience, then learning how to meet both pleasurable experience and unpleasurable or uncomfortable. And like I said, this is not easy, and we need a lot of tools to develop to not just dwell on it, right? Because sometimes I get this question, why does Buddhism talk so much about suffering and all of this? And you know, I know I have a lot of suffering. I know the world is full of suffering. And that's like a very common question or response. And there's many ways I've answered it over the years or just had a conversation on it. But really today I feel it's like sort of like that's not the point, you know? we're that's easy to do. It's really easy to become preoccupied with either something comfortable, like something pleasurable, or something uncomfortable. We become preoccupied with both, right? That's easy to do. What's hard is to or what's challenging or what takes time in our practice and learning and reflection of the Dharma is to develop a way of working with it where we were interested in looking at our prison because we understand the keys out of the prison are in the prison room. They're in our cell. That needs to become some kind of a recognition in our Buddhist studies. So we don't look outside of our prison cell for the keys to get out. We look inside. That's why the Buddha's first teaching was no dukkha, right? So I just wanted to clarify that because I think otherwise we could be wasting a lot of time and like having and also creating unnecessary struggle because we're trying to practice authentically, but then we don't know how to bear witness to our pain because all we do is get overwhelmed by it, dwell in it, or know how to disassociate or reject it. So that's what I'm saying. The body and the feeling world is a big component here, right? So again, I just want to say it, even though I'm not really teaching on those practices this time. I have a lot of content you can access through my website on that. I can introduce you at the end or later, but and also I can recommend, my teacher Sonny Rinpoche has a lot of content on that. It's also an area that's being explored in a lot of different, also secular meditation. So there's a lot of resources for this kind of thing. But as a Buddhist, there's a particular, or Buddhist curious, there's a particular area we can explore, which is like, we're not just interested in sort of our psychology, we're interested in waking up. So we explore all aspects of our humanness because of that. So the view, as I talked about yesterday, or the aim is a little different. This is, I think, one key area where a practice that's used for, how do you say it, wellness can actually be used for a Dharma practitioner, but in a different way because the motivation is different. We might just need it like to understand how to work with our wounds on the feeling level, but we're doing it with bodhicitta because we want to wake up. And it will actually result in a much different experience than just doing it as a wellness practice. Again, I'm not also saying wellness practices are bad. They're just there's a different aim. Most people, when they approach a wellness practice or meditation as wellness, there's a belief or an implicit idea that they can find some kind of comfort. And the Buddha said, well, I'm not sure about that, honey. I mean, we're talking about comfort in this dream-like experience that's sort of produced from afflictive emotion, right? So anyways, okay, let's take a 5-minute break. Yeah, we'll come back at 11:30. And yeah.